some references to COVID. There we go. Some references to COVID, and that's what that's about. So I want to acknowledge that I am on Treaty 6 territory and the land of Métis Nation Region 4. When I think about these lands, I think about the way that the land supports me. I'm going through a bit of a hard time myself right now, and yesterday I was feeling really discombobulated and I really out of sorts. And I went outside and I kind of stepped on the leaves and I really felt the wind on my face, and I felt so grateful for the care that the land provides me. This painting that you can see is by a friend of mine, Lana Whiskey Jack, and it's about Meeting Moon, which was the moon that we were last in. I think we're in a different moon now, about migration, but I really like this painting because it shows a person who is meant to be sort of a ambiguous person, an androgynous person. And Lana meant for this to be a suggestion of two-spiritness and kind of how the land has always allowed for this kind of diversity. As a transgender person, this is a really important message for me. And I really admire the two-spirit people that I have in my life who show me how as gender diverse people, we are a part of the land, and we have always been. So PolicyWise, who are we? We are a research and evaluation organization, and the point of the research that we do is to support the development of policy programs and services that benefit the well-being of Albertans. We have started to open up to all of Canada, but we are from Alberta, and it's an important part of our work. We do research, evaluation, and data analyses to build communities where children, youth, and families can all thrive. So this project was a part of our research that was focused on the gendered impact of COVID-19. So how has COVID impacted women's labor market participation in particular? The aims of our project were to understand the intersectional impacts and trends in Alberta for women's employment, develop programs and policy tools that help support including women in a stronger way in the Alberta labor force, and spreading the word, amplifying existing social society initiatives that benefit women and all people. So we did this by conducting an environmental scan to see what is available to support women's employment. Then we conducted a multi-method study. This will be what we're talking about today. So we did this as a combination of a Statistics Canada data analysis and engaging with women with lived experience of Alberta's labor market. And from there, we are developing, and we have developed a few program and policy tools to support including women in the labor market in Alberta. So due to COVID and there's been an affordability crisis on top of the lost wages that people experienced through the pandemic. So I know we all are feeling it. When we go to the grocery store, things are really expensive, and that's impacting it's impacting us all, but in particular, it's impacting women. So these are some statistics from our analysis of labor market trends from Statistics Canada. So we found that in Alberta, 34% of women are out of the labor force versus 26% of men. So out of the labor force means that they're not looking for jobs, they're not employed right now, they are just not engaged with the labor force. So this is really a loss for women. Women are not as engaged and not bringing in income in the same way that men are. Alberta has the widest gender gap in Canada. So it's 71%. This means that for every dollar that men make, women make 71%, or 71 cents, I mean. So this means that, this is for comparing women and men who are in the same kinds of jobs. So it's factoring in that discrepancy in women's promotions and stuff like that as well. So this is quite high, and we'll talk a little bit later about what might cause this. Every year, Albertan women with young children, so children under 5, lose 20% of their employment hours versus 10% for men. So this really demonstrates that women are still taking on much of the childcare duties. And for women-owned businesses, 79% of them operate without any employees versus 67% of men's businesses. So this means that women-owned businesses are more likely to be a one-person business versus a business that has more employees. When we were talking to women, this means that women are if they get sick, their whole business has to shut down. Where if you have employees, things can still carry along without you. Thinking about COVID, right? This is something that really became important in COVID, where women's incomes were lost when they got sick because they weren't able to continue their business operations. Looking at the different parts of what we heard in our analysis, the first one that we heard is that childcare is really important to women's labor market participation. And if you think about that statistic about women losing employment hours, it really speaks to this. So I think this is a really impactful quote because it suggests kind of how inaccessible childcare can be for women. The after-school daycare expects you to bring your kids to the location. They are not arranging transportation from the school to the daycare. So if I can drive the kids to the daycare, then I don't need daycare, right? It doesn't really work, right? So we have a childcare sector where the needs of workers isn't always being acknowledged or accommodated within childcare. Early childcare educator wages are 44% of the average Albertan wage. So overall, ECEs, early childhood educators, aren't earning as much as the average, quite a bit lower. And so this impacts how many workers are available to provide childcare, and it can be quite hard to find childcare in Alberta. When Statistics Canada polled parents who were having a hard time finding childcare for their children in Alberta, these are the different reasons why parents felt that they were having a hard time. So 43% of parents who were having a hard time finding childcare reported that, but finding childcare that fit their budget was an issue. So childcare is expensive and people couldn't find childcare that was affordable for them. 39% of parents found that the scheduling of the childcare was an issue. So they couldn't find childcare that accommodated their work schedule. Maybe they worked at night and childcare wasn't available at night. And 10% of Albertan families who were having a hard time finding childcare reported that they couldn't find childcare that respected and accommodated their cultural and language needs, which is a really intersectional, important issue, the issue of culturally responsive childcare. So our recommendations based on what we heard from the community and from Statistics Canada are to increase the affordability of childcare in Alberta. So we have a deal with the federal government coming out where childcare is going to be made to be $10 a day. This deal won't be implemented until 2026, and it may not include after school and after hours or overnight childcare. So we want to recommend that governments increase the availability of this. We also need more diverse options for childcare. This includes, like I've mentioned, overnight, after school care. It includes culturally responsive care. And we need to develop childcare priorities based on the actual needs of community members. So there needs to be some community engagement that happens to determine what families really need in Alberta. And we need to attract and retain early childhood educators. Like I said, wages for early childhood educators are quite low. That doesn't make for a very competitive job market. It doesn't encourage people to enter that labor force. So we need to adopt a transparent wage grid. So it's really clear what early childhood educators should be making and how they'll progress through their career. There needs to be funding provided to childcare operators to provide competitive wages and benefits packages for ECEs. And there need to be additional scholarships and bursaries made for early childhood educators to further their career development. Next, we heard many things about employment equity. So this is a really impactful quote, I think. Workers don't know what their rights are until they're pushed out. Even if their employer knows, sometimes they are just kind of hoping that the employee isn't aware of their rights and just hopes that they go away, and they often do. So this suggests that workers aren't necessarily aware of what their rights are. It's hard to advocate if you aren't sure what your rights are. I've definitely been in that kind of situation myself. And in Canada, only 6 provinces have pay equity legislation, and Alberta is not one of those provinces. So this means that there's no legislation provincially to assert that women need to be making the same amount as men. And when we think about that 71% gender gap statistic, that's where this is coming from. There's no legislation that's forcing employers to pay women the same amount as men. We also found, we heard from women that while there are many employment programs available for women, they aren't always aligned with women's career goals. So they're often more aligned with government priorities for employment or industry demands rather than the career trajectories that women really want. And so this can be quite a struggle to find an employment program that's aligned with what women are looking for. So what are our recommendations based on our findings? We recommend that governments partner with nonprofits to deliver training programs that work for women. So this includes engaging with women to determine what their priorities are for their careers. What careers would they like to build, and how can we support those? We can also spread and scale existing employment programs for women that have been shown to work and provide them operational funding so they aren't always having to go from grant to grant to grant. They have stable funding that they can rely on. We also recommend fostering equitable, safe, and respectful workplaces for women. So this includes enacting pay equity legislation to ensure that women are paid the same amount as men. We want to build awareness of duty to accommodate, which is the law that requires that employers accommodate the needs of their employees. And so this could include health needs or needs related to disability. And we recommend providing funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within workplace to ensure that workplaces are safe for women. We can put women in jobs all over the place, but if those jobs aren't safe, it's not really going to work out, right? It's not really a fair deal. We spoke to women entrepreneurs. One entrepreneur said that resources to start a business are limited. There are so many criteria. It limits you because if you're new, you don't have employees, you don't have the experience that they're saying you should have. I'm thinking to myself, if you're starting from scratch, where do you begin if you don't have these resources? So this says that when women are starting out, they're trying to access different government subsidies, different grants, and they need to have a certain track record that their business is a successful business. But if you have that track record, do you really need the funding, right? Women are looking for startup funding to get their businesses started. We found that 53% of women-owned businesses in Alberta lost revenue in the first year of COVID-19. So there was a big impact of COVID on women-owned businesses. And if we think about that statistic about how women-owned businesses tend to be a one-person business, COVID would have really impacted those businesses in a way that businesses with more employees wouldn't have been impacted. Thinking about solutions for women entrepreneurs, one woman said, "So looking back now, what I would have wanted is mentorship. I think I just had no idea. I was lost in the abyss and I didn't know what to do." And we heard that again and again, specifically around financial planning and accounting. Women were really struggling with that kind of reporting to the government, and there wasn't a lot of supports available. And if there were supports available, women didn't really know how to access them. So we recommend that governments improve access to startup funding. This could include targeted grants, targeted seed funding for women-owned businesses, partnering with programs who work with women entrepreneurs and end with startup funding for graduates of the program, and incentivizing banks and other investors to invest in women entrepreneurs. We also recommend building stronger business networks. So this could include supporting community-based entrepreneurship programs, including those with mentorship and networking opportunities, and partnering with nonprofits to create affordable small business accounting programs to help solve that problem where women were feeling really out to sea and confused about how to deal with the financial aspects of having a business. We heard from a lot of newcomer women, so immigrant, refugee, and other newcomer women. We heard this story over and over where, based on the immigration process, women were really given the impression that there were a lot of jobs available in Canada. The way that immigrants are selected for Canadian citizenship involves thinking about what benefit they have to the economy, which really suggests that there's a big need for newcomer workers, and it really makes it seem like there's going to be jobs here in Canada. And then women were saying that when they arrived in Canada, there actually weren't those jobs available. They were struggling with credential recognition. This was particularly an issue within healthcare professions. So women's licensing wasn't being recognized, and then women were having to work survival jobs. So jobs that were outside of their field, that were lower wage jobs. So we can hear that in this quote. Most of the time, we cannot even work in the fields that we came for. So we're doing these little jobs to survive. And this was really hard on women's self-esteem. They had all this education, they had all this training, and they weren't being employed. And looking at the Statistics Canada data, we can see that too. So 9% of university-educated immigrant women are unemployed versus 5% of women born in Canada, and that's within Alberta. So we're seeing it in the statistics that university-educated immigrant women aren't being employed to the same rate as their peers who were born in Canada. And between 2019 and 2020, so at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, unemployment doubled for women who immigrated in the last 5 years. So we really can see the impacts of COVID on these women who are working in low-wage jobs. If we think about what sectors were really impacted by COVID, a lot of it was the service industry jobs, restaurants, retail, right? And so when immigrant women are being forced to work in these jobs, they lost their income when the pandemic hit. We also heard that a lot of employers were expecting immigrant women to have what they called Canadian work experience, but none of the employers were willing to provide that Canadian work experience. So you can feel how frustrating that must be to keep being told, oh, you need to have worked in Canada, you need to have worked in Canada, but nobody was hiring you. Nobody's willing to provide you that experience. So what are our recommendations to support newcomer women? We recommend streamlining credential recognition and creating bridges to employment. So thinking about how we can take really skilled workers from other countries and bring them into jobs that they are qualified for. This could be through reviewing the credential recognition processes to ensure that they comply with international conventions. There are rules about how to recognize credentials for newcomer workers, and we need to make sure that our practices are aligned with those. We can also create training and mentorship programs for newcomer women that help build that Canadian work experience, so women aren't continuously being told you need to have Canadian work experience. We need to address unconscious bias. That's a source for this Canadian work experience problem. So we can fund community-based programs that build diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly for immigrant women, and incentivize the hiring of newcomer women into professional roles. Finally, we need to improve labor protections for temporary foreign workers and part-time employees. This could include ensuring that they have access to sick time and personal and family responsibility leave, so they're not losing their incomes if they get sick. And we need to build the awareness of workers' rights, both among employers and employed people. Something we heard over and over in our research was that different community-based programs were so important to helping women be connected with the labor force. And when we talked to community workers, we heard about their struggles with funding, and that they felt that the governments weren't really engaging them in a meaningful way, so they didn't really have any impact on how funding is being allocated or how the government engages and supports different nonprofits. So here we can hear, I think it's important that governments are involved with nonprofits and community agencies because we are the ones that are working with these people. We know their stories, and there's kind of that disconnect between the government, whether it's about funding or income support grants or any of that. And funding is set up to be competitive and not collaborative. So if they could change the way the funding is given so that organizations can actually work together without being penalized for it, I think that would make a huge difference, right? So we can support our community nonprofits in a better way that supports us collaborating and building on each other's strengths. So how can we do that? We can re-envision nonprofit funding models. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but most nonprofits work on a project-based funding system. So you'll apply on a different grant opportunity. They'll give you money for a few years, maybe 3, 5, and then that funding stops. You don't have continuous funding. And so if we were to provide more organizations operational funding that continues and is sort of independent of these projects that they're doing, that could support a more holistic and longer term vision for nonprofits. Governments could consider increasing the length of funding opportunities. So sometimes there's a lot of like 1, 2, 3-year grants, but those don't really allow for building a long-term solution to a lot of the issues that nonprofits are working with. So thinking about longer funding terms, 5, 7, 10 years would better support nonprofits. And when they're providing funding, governments need to ensure that their funding provides honoraria so that we can engage people with lived experience, different Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers to make sure that the project that we're doing is aligned and done in a good way. And governments need to provide sufficient funding for evaluation. So this is the way that we know that our projects are on track. To increase the capacity for collaborative care and really build a system of collaboration between different nonprofits, governments can fund wraparound programs that leverage the strengths of multiple different community-based organizations and bring them together to really work together and support people. I know I used to work on the front lines of a nonprofit, and we often found that people were having to go to many different organizations to get all the different services that they need. But that puts a lot of work on the person who's trying to access the services, is usually having a harder time, right? That's why you're accessing services. So that's just so much work. And if we could meet people where they're at and provide them everything in one place, that would really help people out. We also could create more grant opportunities where organizations are encouraged to collaborate with each other and build these really strong partnerships across sectors. So thank you so much. We have a couple of discussion questions after this, and I'd love to hear from you all. I want to draw your attention to this link, which I actually don't think I have saved, so I'll put that in the chat. This is the link to our overall analysis that you're kind of getting a little snippet of right now. Oh yeah, I did have it in my, aha. So if you click on that, that sends you to the analysis that the slides were drawn from, and you have some information about our social media and how to get a hold of us. I'll give a second. If anyone has any questions or any comments, I would love to hear them.
Excellent presentation. I want to say